The first thing you need to understand about humanity is this. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest. We do not live the longest, see the farthest, or think the deepest. We are not made of anything special. No automotive skin, no venom, no psychic frequency that bends weaker minds. We bleed easy. We break easy. By every measurable standard the Galactic Congregation uses to rank civilizations, humans sit somewhere in the bottom third, filed under Tier 4, primitive biological, emotionally unstable, limited threat potential. That last part. That is the part that got everyone killed. Because the congregation had been cataloging species for 11,000 years. They had watched civilizations rise and collapse like breath fogging a cold window. They had files on extinction events, on wars that swallowed solar systems, on species so dangerous that entire star corridors were quarantined for centuries after their fall. They had seen things that would hollow a human mind out like a gourd and leave nothing behind but the shape of the scream. And in 11,000 years of watching, measuring, filing, and ranking, not once had a Tier 4 species looked up at the species that had just kicked their planet and said, "You have no idea what you just did." Not once. Until us. This is not a story about how humanity won. Not really. It is a story about what we are, what we have always been, that every other species in the galaxy was too logical, too rational, too sensible to see coming. It is a story about what happens when the thing doing the threat assessment has never once in its entire evolutionary history had to survive something that wanted it specifically dead. The Voth had. The Kreen had. The Shul had. Every apex predator in the congregation had climbed to the top of their own food chain and looked around and decided we are the worst thing here. Humans looked around and decided to go find something worse. What follows is the record of first contact, first offense, and first consequence, as compiled from congregation intelligence files, human military transcripts, and the personal account of Ambassador Sale of the Voth Directorate, who watched the whole thing happen and later said, in the closest approximation her species has to awe, they were not angry. That is what none of us understood. They were not even frightened. They were interested. Like the problem was a puzzle. Like we were a puzzle. I have been a diplomat for 40 years, and I have never been more afraid of anything in my life than a species that looked at what we did to their world and started taking notes. Asterisk, this is that story. Read carefully. Some of you are human. You already know how it ends. The Voth Directorate did not consider what they were doing a declaration of war. This is important to understand. Not as an excuse. Not as context that softens anything. But because the psychology of what happened, the complete and total failure of threat assessment that triggered the next 4 years of galactic history, begins here in the absolute certainty of a species that had never once been wrong about something being beneath them. The Voth were old. 11,000 years in the congregation. Gray-skinned, four-armed, with a nervous system so distributed across their body that you could remove their head, and they would continue functioning for 6 hours before the body understood it was supposed to stop. They had ended wars between civilizations that had lasted centuries. They had brokered the Kreen Accords. They had sat at the center of the congregation's decision-making architecture for so long that younger species simply accepted their authority the way a planet accepts gravity. Not because it was explained, but because it was constant. They had files on Earth going back 90 years. Since the first unmanned probe humanity had flung past the edge of their solar system, tumbling into deep space with a golden record bolted to its side like a child pinning a note to their own shirt on the first day of school. Asterisk, hello. We are here. Please be friendly. Asterisk, the Voth had read the note. Filed it. Assigned Earth the designation HD 7714 C, Tier 4, and moved on. They checked back periodically the way you check on a plant you're not particularly invested in. Still alive. Still primitive. Radio signals becoming more sophisticated. Nuclear capability achieved. Noted. Flagged. Not alarming. Every Tier 4 species went through a nuclear phase. Some survived it. Most didn't. The ones that didn't weren't missed, because by the time they destroyed themselves, they had not yet mattered. Earth survived its nuclear phase. The Voth updated the file. HD 7714 C. Nuclear capable, surviving. Space travel, early stage. Threat potential, negligible. Emotional volatility, high. Recommend continued observation, no contact. No contact meant no contact. It did not mean no interference. This is the distinction that the Voth, in retrospect, failed to make clearly enough, even to themselves. The interference began as resource logistics. Nothing dramatic. The asteroid belt in humanity's solar system contained deposits of iridium ore, a substrate used in faster-than-light drive calibration that was rare enough to be worth a mining operation, but common enough that the Voth did not flag it as a sensitive acquisition. They sent an automated mining fleet. 12 vessels, each the size of a city block, operating on the far edge of the belt, well outside the orbital range of any of humanity's detection arrays. Or so the survey said. The survey was 90 years old. In 90 years, humanity had built a Mars colony, established a permanent research station on Europa, launched 17 deep space observation satellites, and developed a long-range radar array that could track a refrigerator-sized object at the distance of Neptune. The mining fleet appeared on that array 6 hours after it dropped out of faster-than-light transit. The humans did not panic. This is the first thing the Voth got wrong about them. The assumption that discovery would mean panic. That a Tier 4 species, confronted with evidence of 12 city block-sized alien vessels operating in their solar system, would go through the predictable Tier 4 sequence: denial, religious crisis, governmental paralysis, eventual cautious radio transmission that would take years to compose, and another decade to send. Instead, the International Space Cooperative, humanity's joint space operations body, assembled from the remnants of what had once been competing national space programs, convened an emergency session that lasted 4 hours. Then they sent a transmission, not a radio transmission. A laser comm burst, tight-beamed directly at the lead mining vessel, using 17 different encoding formats, including 3 that the Voth's automated systems had never encountered, and one that was inexplicably a mathematical proof followed by what the Voth's translation algorithm eventually identified as a joke about a chicken crossing a road. The transmission said, in the closest approximation that the Voth's language center could render, "You are operating in our solar system without introduction or permission. We're asking you to stop, identify yourselves, and make contact. We're asking once. After that, we will assume you're not interested in conversation." The automated mining fleet had no diplomatic protocol loaded. It was a mining fleet. It registered the transmission, logged it, did not respond, and continued mining. 3 days later, humanity launched 4 vessels. Not warships. They did not have warships. What they launched were deep space research and recovery vessels, the kind used for asteroid sample retrieval and long-range scientific observation, modified with what the Voth sensors described as improvised kinetic delivery systems, which was a clinical way of saying the humans had bolted railguns to science ships, aimed them at an alien mining fleet, and started moving. The Voth automated systems flagged this as anomalous behavior. The flag went into a queue. The queue was reviewed by a logistics coordinator on a Voth station 16 light minutes away, who looked at the flag, looked at the designation, HD 7714C, Tier 4, negligible threat, and approved a standard deterrence response. The mining fleet extended its defensive shielding, a low-frequency pulse emission designed to interfere with primitive electronic systems, something that would have disabled every human vessel built before the 2090s. The humans had updated their shielding in 2091. The pulse did nothing. There was a long pause, measured in Voth time, approximately 9 minutes, during which the 4 human vessels continued their approach, and the logistics coordinator stared at her sensor display with the particular expression of someone who has just realized the form they filled out was the wrong form. But it is too late now, because the form has already been submitted. Then, the humans fired. Not at the mining fleet. Not directly. They fired at the ore containers, the massive external storage units attached to the flank of each mining vessel, filled with the viridian or that had been extracted over the past 72 hours. 12 precision kinetic strikes, 1 per vessel. And the ore containers did not explode so much as they simply came apart. The pressurized interior venting the contents into space in expanding clouds of crystalline dust that caught the distant sun and made, by all accounts, a genuinely beautiful effect. 12 mining vessels, all functional, all unharmed, all empty. Then, the humans sent a second transmission. Asterisk, we stopped you. Identify yourselves, leave our solar system, and do not return. The ore is gone. We will discuss compensation and formal introduction when you are ready to have that conversation. Until then, go home. Asterisk, it was not the act of a species afraid of what it had found in its solar system. It was the act of a species that had looked at 12 city block-sized alien vessels and immediately begun working out the most efficient way to make them someone else's problem. The logistics coordinator escalated. The case moved up the Voth chain of authority with a speed that was, for the directorate, almost unprecedented, which meant it took 11 days instead of the standard 6 weeks. It arrived on the desk of Director Primary Oriole, who was 400 years old, had overseen first contact with 26 species, and had, in that time, developed a very finely calibrated sense for what a new species was and was not. She read the file. She watched the sensor recording of the ore containers coming apart. She read the human transmissions, reread them, and then sat with the peculiar stillness that among the Voth indicated deep thought. Then she made a mistake. Not an irrational mistake. Not an arrogant mistake in the way that word usually implies. A very precise, very logical mistake built entirely from the available data and 400 years of reliable pattern recognition. She decided the humans were bluffing. The reasoning was sound. Tier 4 species did not escalate against congregation members. Even the ones who discovered the truth of the galaxy's power structure early, even the ones who bristled and resisted and sent angry transmissions, they did not escalate. Because the pattern in 11,000 years was consistent. When a young species truly understood the scale of what they were dealing with, the instinct for self-preservation always won. Always. Bluster became negotiation. Aggression became caution. It was biological. It was rational. It was, as far as the congregation knew, universal. Oriole issued a directive. The mining operation would continue. The fleet would be upgraded to crewed vessels, showing a face, demonstrating presence, making clear through physical evidence what the primitive survey data could not fully convey, that the species now hovering at the edge of humanity's asteroid belt was large, established, ancient, and not the kind of thing you prodded with modified science ships and then waited to see what happened. She also authorized a planetary information package, a data burst aimed at Earth's communication infrastructure, not an invitation, not a negotiation, but a document. Here is who we are. Here is how old we are. Here is the congregation. Here is where you stand in it. Here is the word for what you are. Tier 4. Here is what that means. She expected the humans to read it and go quiet. She expected the pattern. The data burst arrived at Earth on a Thursday morning, local time, which was relevant only because it meant the first people to receive it and begin translating it were the overnight shift at the ISC monitoring station in Nairobi, and the first person to read a full translated summary was a 31-year-old signals analyst named Corporal Mara Osei, who had been awake for 19 hours, was on her third coffee, and had the particular mental clarity of someone too tired to be properly intimidated by anything. She read the summary. She read it again. She flagged it priority 1 and sent it up the chain. Then she leaned back in her chair, looked at the ceiling for a long moment, and said something that would later be included verbatim in the official ISC report as the first recorded human response to formal congregation contact. She said, asterisk, oh, they ranked us. They actually sat down and ranked us like a little list. That is either the funniest thing I have ever seen or we are about to have a very bad year. Asterisk, it was both. The ISC convened again. Longer this time. 48 hours of continuous session, the kind that leaves everyone in the room looking like they have been pressed under a weight for 2 days, which they had. The congregation document was thorough. It was not gentle, but it was not cruel. It had the particular tone of something written by people who have explained the same thing to dozens of species and have long since stopped feeling anything about the explaining. Here is the hierarchy. Here is your place in it. Here is what is expected of Tier 4 species. Observation only, no active space program beyond your home system. No contact with other species without congregation mediation, compliance with resource acquisition requests as determined by congregation survey. Compliance with resource acquisition requests. There was a long silence in the room when that line was read out loud. Then General Yusuf Kamara, head of the ISC Defense Division, who had been sitting very quietly for the past 6 hours and had not said anything except read that line again twice, put down his coffee cup and said, "Asterisk, so they're telling us that because they are old and large and have been doing this for a long time, we're supposed to sit in our solar system and let them come take things out of it whenever they want." Asterisk, nobody answered. "And they sent this," asterisk, he continued, asterisk, after we already told them to leave. After we already demonstrated that we could, at minimum, inconvenience them. Asterisk, still nobody answered. They read us as a bluff. Asterisk, he picked up his coffee cup. "Put it back down. That," asterisk, he said, asterisk, "is a mistake I am going to make sure they understand they made." Asterisk, the ISC did not panic. This is the thing that the Voth, and later the entire congregation, would spend years trying to understand and would never quite manage. The ISC did not panic, did not stall, did not go quiet. They spent 48 hours not being afraid and instead being very, very busy. They drafted a response to the congregation document. 2 paragraphs, formally worded. The first paragraph acknowledged receipt and confirmed understanding of the congregation structure, history, and tier ranking system. The second paragraph said that the concept of resource acquisition without consent was not something humanity would be accepting, that the asteroid belt fell within the boundary of the Sol system, which humanity considered sovereign territory, that any further unauthorized extraction would be met with force, and that humanity wished to formally open diplomatic negotiations with the congregation regarding the terms of their relationship. Not acknowledgement of inferiority, not a plea. Not a threat exactly, more the kind of language used by someone who has decided they're done discussing whether something is negotiable and would now like to discuss the specific terms. Oriole read it. She read it 3 times. She convened her own council, which was a longer process because her council had many members and several of them needed to be contacted across significant interstellar distances. It took 6 days. When the council assembled and the document was presented, the initial response from most members was a variation of what the logistics coordinator had felt, the vague sensation of having submitted the wrong form. One council member, Directorate Senior Vel, who was the oldest among them at 612 years and who had seen things that made Oriole's 400 years look like a brief vacation, said something that was not recorded in the official minutes because the recorder assigned to the session later said he had assumed it was too informal to include. Vel said, asterisk, has anyone checked whether they have done this before? Whether any species in the lower tiers has ever responded to a resource survey this way? Asterisk, they checked. The answer was no. Then, asterisk, Vel said, asterisk, we have no pattern for what they do next. Asterisk, Oriole decided to create one. She authorized a show of force. 3 crude Voth vessels. Not mining ships, not automated systems, but actual director of vessels staffed by actual Voth personnel, each one 3 kilometers long, each one carrying enough firepower to sterilize a large moon. She sent them to the edge of the Sol system with instructions not to fire unless fired upon, but to make themselves clearly visible and to transmit the congregation's response to humanity's 2-paragraph letter. The congregation's response was a single line. Tier 4 status does not grant negotiating rights. Comply or face consequences. Asterisk, the 3 vessels dropped out of faster-than-light transit on a Tuesday. By Thursday, humanity knew they were there. By Friday, the ISC had a plan. By the following Monday, they were building the thing that the plan required, working in 3 shifts around the clock in the orbital assembly yards above Earth and Mars in the kind of organized, relentless, joyful collective effort that humanity tended to produce when given a sufficiently large and sufficiently clear problem to solve. Something that Corporal Osei, watching the assembly feeds from Nairobi, described in her personal log as *, the specific energy of a species that has been looking for a good reason to do something absolutely unhinged and has finally been handed one. *, they were not afraid. They were building. The Voth vessels held position at the edge of the system and waited for the pattern to resolve, for the bluster to collapse, for the caution to set in, for the Tier 4 species to look at 3 kilometers of director firepower and arrive at the only conclusion that 11,000 years of history said they should arrive at. They waited 43 days. On the 44th day, something came out of the orbital assembly yards and started moving toward them. It was not a science vessel. It was not a modified research ship. It was something the Voth sensors struggled to classify for a full 6 minutes because nothing in their database matched it. Not the configuration, not the energy signature, not the sheer accumulated mass of it, built from asteroid and Europa Station alloys, and the kind of angry, focused ingenuity that humanity had historically reserved for problems they had decided were personal. It was by any military taxonomy the Voth possessed a warship. The first one. Humanity had built its first warship in 43 days because 3 3-kilometer alien vessels had parked at the edge of their solar system and told them to comply. The Voth commander on the lead vessel, Senior Captain Drayle, 20 years of service, veteran of 2 border enforcement operations, the kind of officer who was calm in situations that made younger soldiers freeze, looked at what was coming toward his ship and felt something he had not felt in his professional career. He did not have a name for it. His species did not have many uses for the specific sensation. He opened a channel to Director Primary Oriole and said, very carefully, *, the Tier 4 species is approaching with a weapons platform of unknown classification. I am requesting updated orders. * Oriole said, *, hold position. They are demonstrating. They will not fire. * Drayle watched the warship close the distance. It was not alone. Behind it, 6 more coming out of the yards. Still half-built. Still trailing construction scaffolding. Moving anyway, Drayle said, very quietly, to no one in particular. *, I do not think they read the file. * the humans had read the file. They just disagreed with the conclusion. The warship was named Perseverance, not after anything poetic. Not after a god of war, or a legendary commander, or a concept designed to frighten. After a rover. A small 6-wheeled robot that humanity had landed on Mars a century earlier, that had trundled across the red dust for years, alone, sending data home, finding signs of ancient water in the rock, surviving cold that should have killed it, doing its job with the quiet persistence of a thing that did not know how to stop. The ISC naming committee had considered other options. They had debated. In the end, General Kamara had looked at the list of suggestions, retribution, defiance, righteous, iron will, and said, *, we are not naming our first warship after an emotion. We are naming it after a behavior. Perseverance, it was. She was 1.2 kilometers long, shorter than the Voth vessels by more than half, built fast, and built hard with the specific philosophy that had guided human engineering since the first person looked at a problem too large to solve and decided to solve a smaller version of it so many times in a row that the large problem eventually had nowhere left to hide. She was not elegant. The construction scaffolding was still on her in places, panels not yet fully sealed, conduit runs exposed along her ventral hull, the whole thing looking less like a vessel that had been built and more like a vessel that had been grown very fast in a hurry and was still figuring out its final shape. Behind her, the 6 half-finished warships moved in loose formation. They had names too. * resilience, tenacity, endeavor, resolution, fortitude, grit, all behaviors. Not one of them named for a concept of victory or glory. The ISC psychologists who later analyzed the naming convention described it as the most accidentally perfect piece of psychological warfare in human history. Because naming your warships after the qualities required to survive, rather than the qualities required to win, communicated something to any sufficiently analytical species that a direct threat never could. It said, *, we have already accepted that this will be hard. We have already decided it does not matter. Senior Captain Drayle had not received the ISC psychologist report. It would be written years later by humans looking backward. But he felt the content of it, standing on the bridge of his vessel, watching Perseverance and her unfinished sisters close the distance, and the feeling he had no name for got sharper. He sent another message to Oriole. *, 7 vessels approaching. Lead vessel is weapons capable and shows active targeting. 6 vessels appear to be incomplete. Construction elements still visible. All 7 are moving at approximately 60% maximum capable speed. * He paused. Then he added, * Director Primary. They brought the unfinished ones. * There was a silence on the channel. Oriole said, * why? * I believe, * Drayle said, * to show us they had more. * Another silence. Longer. Oriole said, * hold position. Do not fire. * Drayle held position. Perseverance * crossed what would have been, in any standard congregation confrontation, the point of no return. The distance at which approach by an armed vessel was classified as an act of aggression. It crossed that line and kept coming. The 6 half-built ships crossed it. Still coming. Drayle tracked their targeting signatures and found something unusual. Perseverance was not targeting his vessels. She was targeting something else. A very specific something else. The same or containers that the 4 modified science ships had targeted weeks earlier, now replaced on the new full-crewed mining fleet that Oriole had sent in behind the 3 warships as a statement of intent. The humans were not targeting the warships. They were targeting the mining equipment. Again, * it was so consistent, so deliberate, so carefully not quite an act of war that Drayle sat with it for a full 30 seconds, turning it over, and then said out loud on the bridge, * they're telling us the same thing they told the automated fleet. They're telling us the mine is the problem. Not us. Not the Directorate. The mine. * His first officer, a younger Voth named Kale who had graduated top of his cohort from the Directorate Military Academy, and had, until approximately 3 weeks ago, considered herself very well prepared for field operations, said, * what does that mean? * It means, * Drayle said, * they're still trying to avoid a war. They're drawing a line and asking us not to cross it. * Sir. * Yes. * The line is the entire asteroid belt. * Yes. * We need the ore from the asteroid belt. * Yes. Kale processed this for a moment. Then she said, * so what do we do? * Drayle looked at the approaching formation, at the flagship with its still cooling weapons systems, and its name he did not yet know, at the 6 unfinished ships behind it, trailing construction debris like comets trailing ice, still moving, still coming, with the unhurried purposefulness of something that had already decided it was going to arrive regardless of what stood in the way. He said, I'm going to recommend to the Director Primary that we consider the possibility that the Tier 4 assessment requires revision. He sent the recommendation. Oriole was not ready to revise the assessment. Not yet. Not because she was foolish. She was not, by any measure, foolish. But because 11,000 years of reliable data is a weight that does not move easily, and the data said this was still a bluff, had to still be a bluff, because the alternative was a conclusion that broke everything she understood about how young species behaved. She authorized the warships to issue a final warning and, if the human vessels did not halt, to demonstrate capability by destroying a small asteroid at the edge of the belt. Demonstration of capability was standard congregation de-escalation protocol. Show the primitive species what you can do. Not to threaten, to inform. To make the stakes legible. To allow them to make a rational decision in full possession of the relevant facts. The lead Voth vessel fired. The asteroid, roughly the size of a city block, selected specifically for its isolation and its distance from anything inhabited, came apart in approximately 4 seconds. Not an explosion exactly. The Voth energy weapon was precise enough that it was more of an erasure, the rock simply ceasing to exist in any coherent form and becoming instead a brief, beautiful expanding sphere of gravel and gas. Perseverance asterisk did not stop. She did not slow. She also fired. Not at the Voth vessels. Not at any asteroid. Not at anything the Voth weapons officers were tracking. She fired at the mine. The new mine. The crude replacement for the automated fleet that Oriole had sent as a demonstration of continued operational intent. The ore containers came apart exactly as the previous ones had. Then, Perseverance opened a channel. The voice that came through was calm. Not aggressive. Not triumphant. The kind of calm that lives on the other side of a decision that has already been made and can no longer be unmade. The translation algorithm rendered it as a woman's voice, though Voth had no gender distinction in their own language. Something about the encoding pattern read female to the algorithm, and the message was 4 sentences. You showed us what you can do. We showed you what we will do. The mine stops. Talk to us, or we will keep doing this every time you rebuild it. And we have more ships in the yards right now than you have in this system. Asterisk 4 sentences. In the Directorate Council chamber, which had been in continuous session for the past 11 days, Vel said, asterisk, she is not wrong about the ships. Asterisk Oriole said, asterisk, the survey cannot be right. Rerun the production capacity estimate for their orbital yards. Asterisk they reran it. The estimate came back revised. Significantly revised. Because the original survey was 90 years old, and in 90 years humanity had built 11 orbital assembly facilities, 4 of which had been constructed in the past decade, and the rate of construction acceleration, the revised estimate was projecting suggested that within 18 months humanity would have more warship tonnage in the Sol system than the 3 Directorate vessels currently stationed there. Not more firepower, not more experience, not more capability in any qualitative sense, just more. More asterisk was a quantity the Directorate understood very well. Vel said, asterisk they breed fast, build fast, and do not appear to have a threshold at which they stop. Asterisk, every species has a threshold. Asterisk, Oriole said. Yes, asterisk Vel said. Asterisk, but we do not know where theirs is. And they've already passed the point where a rational species would have found it. Asterisk, the negotiations began. Not immediately. There was posturing first because posturing was expected and serve a function. It allowed both sides to establish the terms of the conversation without the conversation itself becoming the act of capitulation. The Voth pulled the mining fleet back. The humans pulled Perseverance back. Both sides maintained their respective positions at a distance that was technically outside each other's strike range, and practically inside it if either party decided to close fast, which both parties understood, which made the distance feel less like safety and more like a mutual agreement to stand on either side of a line drawn in sand. The first human diplomat arrived at the negotiating coordinates in a vessel that was technically a converted cargo shuttle. Modified, the ISE had clearly done some work to make it look more like a diplomatic craft and less like something that usually hauled equipment, but the bones of the cargo shuttle were still visible, and the Voth ambassador assigned to the initial contact session, a career diplomat named Sale, stared at it for a long time, trying to understand what it communicated about the species that had sent it. She eventually decided it communicated one of 2 things. Either the humans did not have a dedicated diplomatic vessel because they had never needed one before, or they had one and chose not to use it because arriving in a cargo shuttle made a point she was not yet fully able to decode. She later concluded it was both. The human diplomat was a woman named Dr. Priya Vasanthakumar. 53 years old, former professor of xenolinguistics at the University of Bangalore, seconded to the ISC's newly created First Contact Division, which had not existed 4 months ago and had been assembled with the same speed and improv energy as the warships. She came aboard the designated neutral station, a small congregation-owned installation normally used for boundary mediation between established species. Wearing a formal ISC jacket that someone had clearly sewn together hastily from 2 different uniform standards, carrying a translation device that looked like it had been built by engineering students in a lab, accompanied by a single aide who appeared to be about 26 years old, and had the expression of someone experiencing the best and worst day of their life simultaneously. Sale had prepared extensively for this meeting. She had read everything the directorate had on humanity, all the files, all the intercepts, the linguistic analysis of the transmissions, the behavioral profiles compiled by the survey teams. She had also done something she did not strictly need to do and would not have mentioned if asked. She had spent 3 evenings watching recordings of human behavior, captured from Earth's own broadcasting infrastructure. Entertainment mostly. News. A sporting event she did not understand, but found strangely compelling. She had done this because she felt, in the small part of her professional self that still trusted instinct over data, that the files were not enough. That the files described a species, but did not explain one. That there was something about what the humans had done, and the way they had done it, the consistency, the specific quality of their not fear, that the survey methodology was not designed to capture. 3 evenings of human entertainment had not answered her question, but it had given her a clearer picture of the shape of it. They sat down across from each other. Sale and 2 of her staff, Vasantakumar and her young aide. The translation systems hummed between them, a field of light and processed language that was imperfect but functional. Sale said, in the congregation formal opening, *, we recognize your presence. We acknowledge your claim to voice. We proceed. * Vasantakumar said, *, hello. Thank you for agreeing to talk. We would also like to acknowledge that this situation got away from everyone faster than it should have, and we would prefer to find a path forward that does not involve anyone shooting anything else. Sale's staff registered this as an anomalous opening. The formal response to the congregation opening was codified. There was a specific phrasing, a specific acknowledgement of hierarchy, a specific positioning of the new species as the junior party entering into dialogue with the established one. Vasantakumar had not done any of that. She had said hello. We proceed. Sale said carefully. The directorate's position. Before you get to positions, Vasantakumar said. Can I ask you something? Off the formal record, can I ask you something? Sale processed this. Off the formal record, which was itself a concept the congregation's diplomatic framework did not have a clean slot for, because formal records were the record was the thing was the record, and the suggestion that useful information might exist outside the formal record was not a standard diplomatic mechanism. You may ask, Sale said. Vasantakumar leaned forward slightly. She had the body language, Sale noted, of someone who was professionally warm, but watching very carefully. Someone who had learned to seem open in order to see what an open posture shook loose. Did you actually think we backed down? Vasantakumar said. Genuinely. You've been out here for 11,000 years. You've done this, what the file says, all these first contacts. Did you look at us and think they'll back down? Or did someone in your organization look at the asteroid belt incident and say, wait, maybe not? Sale was quiet for a moment. Then, she said, because she was 430 years old and had not survived that long by being dishonest with herself. There was a recommendation to revise the threat assessment. It was not acted upon in time. Whose recommendation? A field commander. Senior, Captain Drayle. Vasantakumar nodded slowly. Made a small note on her device. I'd like to send him something. Not official. Just, he made the right call, and I'd like him to know that we know he made the right call. Sale stared at her. That is not a standard diplomatic procedure. Asterisk, she said. No. Asterisk, Vasantakumar agreed. Asterisk, but it costs nothing and it creates goodwill with someone who might be involved in decisions down the line, and I figure we could use all the goodwill we can build right now. Asterisk, the negotiations lasted 9 days. They did not resolve everything. They were not designed to. They were the opening of a conversation that both sides understood would be long, would be difficult, and would require building from the ground up a framework for a relationship that neither side had a template for. Because the congregation's templates assumed a hierarchy that humanity had declined to accept, and humanity's instincts assumed a parity that the power reality of the galaxy did not yet support. What they produced, after 9 days, was a document that the congregation's legal scholars would later describe as either unprecedented or troubling, depending on which legal scholar you asked. It was not a submission. It was not a treaty between equals, exactly. It was something more like a mutual recognition of standoff. The Voth acknowledged humanity's claim to the soul system. Humanity acknowledged the congregation's larger authority and agreed to enter a formal relationship process. Both sides agreed to halt military activity pending the outcome of that process, and buried in the technical appendices was a clause that Vasantakumar had insisted on, and that Sale had, after a long silence, agreed to include. The clause said that the Tier 4 designation was under review. Tier 4. Negligible threat potential. Sale, in her private record, noted that she was not certain any designation could contain what she had seen in the past 4 months. Not the warships, not just the warships, not just the speed with which they had been built. Something else, something harder to file. She described it as the specific quality of the species that does not distinguish between the thing that is survivable and the thing that is worth dying for. Not because they cannot see the difference, but because they have decided the difference does not matter. She did not include this in the official record. She did not think the congregation was ready for it yet. She was right, because the thing she had seen, the thing Perseverance and her unfinished sisters had demonstrated, the thing the 2-paragraph letter had demonstrated, the thing Corporal Ose had demonstrated by calling it funny before calling it a threat, the thing that Sale had spent 9 evenings and 9 days trying to file correctly, was only the surface layer. Beneath it was something older, something that lived in human bones the way Voth distributed their consciousness across their body. Not a thing they did, but a thing they were. The galaxy did not know yet what that thing produced when it was given enough time and enough reason. The galaxy was about to find out. 3 weeks after the negotiations concluded and the formal observation period began, humanity launched 12 more warships from the orbital yards. Not because the agreement had been violated, not because anything had happened, because the yards were still running, because the ISC, having started the program, saw no reason to stop it, because somewhere in the long rational chain of human decision-making was a link that said, asterisk, we learned something here. We learned we were behind. We do not intend to be behind again. Asterisk Sale received the sensor report. 12 more ships. Named, she checked the translation. Audacity, dogged, steadfast, unbroken, relentless, patience, iron, constant, driven, grounded, fixed, stubborn, still behaviors. Not one of them a weapon or a god or a promise of destruction. She sent a message to Director Primary Oriole, who was in session with the full Directorate Council, and the message was 6 words. Asterisk, they did not stop building. Ever. Asterisk, the Council received it. They were quiet for a long time. Then Vel, 620 years old, who had seen more than anyone else in that room, who had reviewed the files of every species the congregation had ever encountered, who had in his own way been making threat assessments for longer than most civilizations lasted, said something that was recorded this time, that went into the official minutes, and that would later become, depending on which species you belong to, either a warning or a prophecy. He said, asterisk, find out everything we do not know about them. Everything. Not the surveys. Not the files. What we do not know. Because every assumption we have made has been wrong, and the one assumption we cannot afford to make wrong is the one about what they stop at. Asterisk, he looked around the room. I'm beginning to think, asterisk, he said, asterisk, that the answer is nothing. And I would like to be sure. Asterisk nobody disagreed. Outside, in the cold of space, somewhere between Earth's orbit and the asteroid belt, 12 new warships ran their shakedown protocols under a sky that had no name for what they were yet. They would need one, eventually. The galaxy was not ready for it. It was going to get it anyway. The Kreen found out about humanity the way most species in the congregation found out about things they should have been paying attention to earlier. Too late, secondhand, and in a context that made the information immediately personal. The Kreen were not Voth. They did not share the Voth's long history of careful management, diplomatic patience, and institutional caution. They were old in a different way, older than most congregation members, predating the directorate by 3,000 years, which in the hierarchy of things gave them a certain standing that they had, over the centuries, used primarily to do whatever they wanted and explain it afterward. Their homeworld was a high-gravity rock with a thin atmosphere and a sun that tried to kill everything on it daily, and this had produced a species with dense bone structure, a threat response system calibrated to assume that anything it had not already killed was a potential threat, and a cultural framework that measured status almost entirely through demonstrated physical and military dominance. They had fought the Voth twice. Lost once, won once, arrived at a détente that had lasted 800 years primarily because both sides had enough other things to deal with. They sat on the congregation council with the specific energy of a large animal that has agreed to be in the room, but has not agreed to be happy about it. They heard about the Sol System incident through the standard congregation intelligence network, which meant they heard about it approximately 3 months after it was over, filtered through directorate framing, in a summary document that described the situation as a minor boundary dispute with an emerging Tier 4 species, currently under diplomatic observation and review. The document included a sensor recording of the initial confrontation and a brief note on the status of negotiations. The Kreen High Commander, a 7-foot-tall mass of scar tissue and carefully arranged aggression named Vreth, read the summary, watched the sensor recording, and arrived at a conclusion that was entirely different from Oriel's. Oriel had seen a bluff, a Tier 4 species making noise. Vreth saw something else. He had spent 300 years in military command. He had fought 14 campaigns. He had, on 2 separate occasions, watched species that the congregation had described as manageable demonstrate in the field that they were not. He had a sense for it. Not an analytical sense, not a methodological one, but the kind of deep physical intuition that comes from spending enough time in situations where being wrong is fatal. The sense that recognizes a dangerous thing not by what it is, but by how it moves. He watched Perseverance move toward 3 Voth warships. Not fast, not aggressive, just moving, with the particular quality of something that has decided to arrive and is not interested in the question of whether arrival is advisable. He watched the 6 unfinished ships behind her. He thought about the naming convention, which the intelligence summary had included as a footnote. Asterisk perseverance, resilience, tenacity. Asterisk he did not have the cultural framework to fully decode it, but he had enough to feel its shape. He called a meeting of his senior military staff and said, asterisk the Voth are handling this wrong. Asterisk his staff, all of whom had been selected specifically for their comfort with Vreth's direct manner, waited. They are treating this as a diplomatic problem. It is not a diplomatic problem. It is a problem of threat assessment, and the Voth have assessed wrong. Asterisk he pulled up the sensor recording on the chamber's display, froze it on the image of Perseverance at the moment she crossed the line, the formal boundary at which approach becomes aggression. This species, asterisk he said, asterisk decided to cross this line. They did not cross it in anger, not in desperation. They crossed it with 6 unfinished ships behind them to make a point, which means someone calculated the psychological effect of bringing unfinished ships and decided that effect was worth the tactical vulnerability of fielding an incomplete fleet. Asterisk silence. That is not the thinking of a frightened species. That is not the thinking of a bluffing species. That is the thinking of a species that is comfortable with asymmetric commitment. Asterisk one of his commanders, a veteran named Drac, said, Asterisk, the Voth seem to have it under control. Asterisk, the Voth, asterisk, Vreth said. Asterisk began negotiations. Which means the Voth blinked. Which means this Tier 4 species looked at Directorate warships and did not blink first. Asterisk, he let that sit. I want a full intelligence workup, independent of the Directorate file. I want to know everything about their military production capacity, their resource base, their biological parameters, stress tolerance, pain threshold, metabolic endurance under combat conditions. I want to know what it takes to stop one of them. Asterisk, the workup took 4 months. When it came back, Vreth read it in his command chair in one sitting. 7 hours, cross-referencing the raw data against his own field experience, building in his mind the three-dimensional picture of a species that the numbers alone could not fully render. The numbers were interesting. The biological parameters were more interesting. But what stopped him, what made him sit forward and read the same section 3 times, was a subreport filed by the intelligence analyst tasked with reviewing human historical military records. Humanity had been at war with itself for most of its recorded history. Not occasionally, not periodically, almost continuously, somewhere on their planet. In almost every century of their civilization, humans have been fighting other humans. The wars varied enormously in scale, in cause, in the weapons used, in the strategies employed, in the ideologies that drove them. What did not vary was the persistence. They did not stop fighting because they ran out of reasons. They found new reasons. They did not stop fighting because the losses became too great. They absorbed losses that would have ended other species and adapted the tactics and tried again. The record was full of specific data points that the analyst had flagged as notable. Sieges lasting years, campaigns crossing continents, wars that lasted decades, that outlasted the specific governments and rulers that had started them, that took on a momentum of their own that no individual decision could stop. Species that evolved in relatively stable environments developed stopping conditions, thresholds at which self-preservation instincts overrode the conflict drive. Humans had those thresholds. They were just set at a level that the analyst comparison models could not easily normalize. And beneath that, more interesting still, the record of what humans did between wars. They innovated. Every major military conflict in human history was followed by a leap in technology, in manufacturing capacity, in logistical sophistication, in the organizational structures required to manage increasingly complex operations. They did not just survive wars. They learned from them. They optimized. Each conflict fed the next generation's capability, and the trajectory, plotted over centuries, was a curve that did not flatten. Vreth put down the report. He sat with it for a long time. Then he did something that was not in his established behavioral pattern and that his staff found slightly alarming when they heard about it. He went to the Congregation Diplomatic Archive and requested the full transcript of the 9-day negotiation between Sale and the human diplomat Vasanthakumar. Not the summary, the full transcript. He read every word. He was looking for something specific, not strategy, not the terms, the texture, the way the human had spoken, thought, reacted, the moments where the negotiation had nearly broken and what had pulled it back, the way Vasanthakumar had operated, what she prioritized, what she was willing to concede, what she would not move on. He found what he was looking for in a section of transcript from day 4, when the Directorate's legal representative had made a formal argument that humanity's unilateral military buildup during the observation period constituted a violation of the spirit of the ceasefire agreement. Vasanthakumar had listened to the full argument. Then, she had said, Asterisk, the ceasefire agreement halted hostile action. We have taken no hostile action. We have continued building because we decided, as a civilization, that we would prefer not to be in a position again where our security depends on the goodwill of parties whose interests may not align with ours. That is not aggression. That is policy. We would be glad to discuss a mutual limitation framework as part of the formal relationship process. But I want to be honest with you. If that framework isn't in place, we will keep building. Not to threaten anyone, because this is what we do when we're worried. Asterisk, when we're worried, Asterisk, not when we're threatened. Not when we're attacked. When they were worried. Vreth underlined it 3 times. He called his staff together and said, asterisk, the Voth are going to lose this negotiation. Not immediately. Over time, they're going to make concessions they have not yet realized they will need to make because they still believe the original threat assessment is directionally correct, and it is not. Asterisk, what do you recommend? Asterisk, Drac asked. I recommend, asterisk, Vreth said, asterisk, that the Kreen Dominion do what the Kreen Dominion has always done when we identify a species that is going to matter. We make contact on our own terms before they have enough power to dictate the terms themselves. Asterisk, that would circumvent Voth mediation. Asterisk, yes. Asterisk, the Directorate will be displeased. Asterisk, the Directorate, asterisk, Vreth said, asterisk, is already wrong about this species. I would rather be ahead of a problem than correct about who caused it. Asterisk, the Kreen vessel arrived at the Sol system boundary 40 days later. It did not arrive with or containers and automated mining equipment. It did not arrive with 3 warships positioned as a deterrent. It arrived alone. 1 Kreen military vessel, Vreth aboard, broadcasting on every frequency humanity had used in its recorded transmissions a message that had been composed with care and checked against the translation algorithms 3 times. The message said, asterisk, we are not the ones who started this with you. We have read what happened, and we want to talk. Not to offer you a place in a hierarchy you did not consent to ask you questions. We are requesting permission to approach. Asterisk, the ISE received it on a Wednesday afternoon. Vasanthakmar, who had been in a debriefing for 6 hours and was operating on approximately the same amount of sleep Corporal Osei, had been running on when the whole thing started, read the message 3 times. Then she called General Kamara, who read it once, and then they sat together in silence for a moment. Different, asterisk, Kamara said. Very, asterisk, Vasanthakmar agreed. What do you want to do? Asterisk, she thought about it. She thought about what she had learned in 9 days across a table from Sale, about how the congregation worked, about what the hierarchy meant, about the cracks and tensions in a structure that was 11,000 years old and had never had to accommodate a species that declined to simply fit into the slot designated for it. I want to let him come, asterisk, she said. Asterisk, and I want to know what he wants before I tell him anything we don't have to tell him. Asterisk, trust but verify. Asterisk, something like that. Asterisk, Vreth came. He came with his staff, and without the specific energy of someone who needed the meeting to go a particular way, a quality that Vasanthakmar registered immediately and found more interesting than almost anything else about him because every other congregation representative she had dealt with had come with an outcome they needed. Vreth came with questions. The first question he asked after the formal opening was done and the translation systems were settled was, asterisk, how did you know we would not fire? Asterisk, Vasanthakmar looked at him. We didn't, asterisk, she said. Vreth was quiet for a moment. You sent Perseverance toward 3 Voth warships without knowing they would not fire. Asterisk, we calculated it was unlikely. The mining operation was resource logistics. If they'd wanted a war, they'd have come with more than 3 ships. But we didn't know. We knew what we were willing to accept as the cost of not backing down, and we decided that cost was acceptable. Asterisk, how did you calculate the acceptable cost? Asterisk, asterisk, she stopped. Asterisk, we're not sure we calculated it. I think we just decided it. Asterisk, Vreth sat with this for a long time. Your decision makers, asterisk, he said, slowly. Asterisk, made a choice that risked armed conflict with a congregation member without a guarantee of survival and without a full threat assessment of the opposing force. Asterisk, yes. Asterisk, why? Asterisk, and Vasanthakmar, 53 years old, linguist, xenoanthropologist, hastily credentialed diplomat, operating in a cargo shuttle in deep space representing a species that 4 months ago had not known any of this existed, thought about it. Actually thought about it. Not what the correct diplomatic answer was. What the true answer was. She said, asterisk, because the alternative was letting them take things out of our solar system without asking. And if we let them do that without saying anything, the message that sends isn't we are peaceful. The message that sends is we are available. And we have spent enough of our history being available to things that did not ask permission. We were not going to do it again. Asterisk Vreth looked at her for a long time. Then he turned to his aide and said something in Korean that the translation algorithm rendered as asterisk, write that down. Asterisk, the conversation lasted 11 days. By the end of it, Vreth and Vasanthkumar had not built an alliance. That was too strong a word for something that early, that uncertain. What they had built was a mutual recognition. A pair of species who had, independently, decided they were not willing to simply fit the shape other things required of them, sitting across a table and agreeing without saying it directly that the galaxy was going to have to make room for more than one thing that did not comply. Sale, when she received the intelligence report on the Vreth meeting, described her reaction in her private record as the specific sensation of watching two things that should not be in the same place simultaneously occupy the same place, and immediately begin making plans. She sent a message to Oriel that was longer and more urgent than anything she had sent in the previous 4 months. Asterisk, the Kreen are not mediating. They are positioning. Vreth has assessed this species correctly, and we have not. Director Primary, I need the Council to understand. This is not a Tier 4 boundary dispute. This has never been a boundary dispute. This is the beginning of something we do not have file for. I would like to begin drafting the file before it drafts itself without us. Asterisk, Oriel called the Council. Vel looked at the message, looked at the intelligence on the Vreth meeting, looked at the latest orbital yard production figures, looked at the warship naming records, looked at everything, and said, asterisk, recommended action. Asterisk, Oriel said, asterisk, we revised the assessment. Not the tier ranking, the threat potential rating. Negligible becomes significant becomes, asterisk becomes what? Asterisk, she thought about the 9 days in the neutral station. About Vasanthkumar, saying, when we're worried, and meaning it as a complete explanation. About Perseverance crossing the line with 6 unfinished ships behind her, and not slowing down. Becomes unknown. Asterisk, she said. Asterisk, we do not have a dataset sufficient to assess the ceiling. We put them in the file as unknown upper bound, and we proceed from that assumption. Asterisk, the Council voted. The assessment was revised. HD 7714 C, formerly Tier 4, formerly negligible threat potential. New designation. Asterisk Tier 3, escalating. Threat potential, unquantified. Special note, anomalous behavioral profile. Does not respond to standard deterrence or hierarchy cues. Military production, ongoing. Relationship with Kreen Dominion, developing. Recommend priority observation and active diplomatic engagement. Asterisk, the special note was written by Vel, who had been in the business of assessing species long enough to know when a note needed to carry more than its words. He added one more line, below the formal notation, in a margin, in his own hand, because it did not belong in the official record but needed to exist somewhere. He wrote, asterisk, they did not stop because we showed them what we could do. They stopped because they chose to. This is not the same thing. The day they choose differently, no file will contain what follows. Asterisk, he closed the record. Outside, in the yards above Earth and Mars, and the new facility humanity had quietly begun constructing near Jupiter's 4th moon, the warships kept coming. Not rushed anymore. They had moved past rushed, past panic fast, into the steady, disciplined rhythm of a civilization that had made a decision about the kind of future it was building and was building it one whole plate at a time. Patience asterisk completed her shakedown. Iron ran her weapons tests. Stubborn, the last of the original 12, came out of the yards on a clear Tuesday morning, her hull still smelling of new welds, her crew the youngest in the fleet, her captain 29 years old, and from a small city in northern Finland whose name would end up, much later, in histories that hadn't been written yet. She looked at her ship. She looked at the solar system around her, the asteroid belt where it had started, the distant glint of the Voth observation post that was there now per the agreement, the blue-white dot of Earth below. She said to her first officer, Asterisk, they really thought we'd back down. Asterisk, he said. Asterisk, seems like it. Asterisk, she was quiet for a moment. Good. Asterisk, she said. Asterisk, I'd like them to keep thinking that for as long as possible. Asterisk, stubborn. Asterisk turned toward the outer system. Somewhere in the files of the Galactic Congregation, a designation changed. Somewhere in the Kreen Dominion, Vreth read a new intelligence report and allowed himself something that was, in Kreen physiognomy, the closest available approximation of a smile. Somewhere on Earth, Corporal Osei was asleep for the first time in a week, dreaming of nothing in particular, while above her the thing she had called funny, and then a threat kept growing, patient, stubborn, relentless, constant. All behaviors. Not one of them a ceiling. The galaxy had started something. It had not yet understood what it had started. It would.